Movies like The Exorcist and The Conjuring show us what happens when evil takes control. But what if I told you those stories weren't just fiction? Behind every Hollywood demon, there's a real case, a priest, a victim, and something science still can't fully explain. Tonight, we'll look at 3 real-life exorcisms so disturbing. They'll make you question everything you believe about good and evil. These aren't ghost stories. These are real events, recorded by witnesses, priests, and in some cases, the victims themselves. This is real-life exorcisms that'll haunt you forever. Our first story takes us to the small, devoutly Catholic town of Klingenberg in 1970s Bavaria, Germany. In a region still steeped in tradition and faith, one family's private struggle would soon become a subject of international debate, a chilling intersection of medicine, religion, and tragedy. At the center of it all was a young woman named Anneliese Michel. Born into a strict and deeply pious Catholic family, Anneliese was known as a bright, sensitive, and well-liked student. She was a dedicated daughter who played the accordion and had aspirations of becoming a teacher. Her life, by all accounts, was ordinary and devout, structured around prayer, school, and family. But in 1968, at the age of 16, that ordinary life was violently interrupted. Anneliese suffered a severe convulsion, the first of many. She was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and began a course of treatment. Yet, despite the medical intervention, her condition didn't improve. Alongside the seizures, a deep, unshakable depression took hold. But as the years went on, something changed. The medical framework that had defined her illness began to feel insufficient to explain the escalating horror of her experience. Anneliese started hearing voices, guttural, growling whispers that tormented her during her daily prayers, telling her she was damned, that she would stew in hell. These were not just fleeting thoughts. They were a constant, invasive presence. Soon, auditory hallucinations were joined by terrifying visual ones. She claimed to see demonic faces, leering, distorted visages, in the faces of people around her, in the patterns on the floor, and in the shadows of her own room. She developed a profound aversion to religious objects. The sight of a crucifix or holy water reportedly caused her physical pain. Doctors prescribed various anticonvulsants and antipsychotic drugs, but nothing helped. In fact, her symptoms only intensified. From a medical standpoint, her case was baffling. From her family's perspective, it was becoming terrifyingly clear that her affliction was not of the body, but of the soul. Her condition worsened dramatically. She began refusing food, claiming the demons wouldn't let her eat. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and self-destructive. She would lick her own urine from the floor, eat spiders and coal, and bark like a dog for days. She would speak in different voices, using foul language and blasphemies that shocked her devout family. Convinced that Anneliese was possessed, her family turned to the church. After initial hesitation, and after an older woman accompanying Anneliese on a pilgrimage noted that the girl was unable to walk past an image of Jesus, the church finally relented. In 1975, the Bishop of Würzburg, Josef Stangl, authorized the rite of exorcism. 2 priests, Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz, were assigned to the case. What followed was an ordeal of almost unimaginable intensity. Over the next 10 months, 67 exorcism sessions were performed, sometimes twice a week. During these rituals, Anneliese's small frame would contort with seemingly superhuman strength, requiring several men to hold her down. She screamed for hours, spoke in multiple languages she had never learned, and identified 6 different demons possessing her, including Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, and Nero. By the spring of 1976, Anneliese was a shadow of her former self. The constant physical exertion of the rituals combined with her refusal to eat, had left her emaciated, frail, and covered in bruises from self-inflicted injuries. She suffered from broken teeth and 2 torn knee ligaments from endless frantic genuflections. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died in her sleep. She weighed only 68 pounds. Her last words, spoken to the priests, were reportedly a request: beg for absolution. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. But the story was far from over. The state prosecutor launched an investigation, and Anneliese's parents and the 2 priests were charged with negligent homicide. The ensuing trial captured the world's attention, pitting modern medicine against ancient religious rites in a court of law. The defense argued that Anneliese was genuinely possessed and that they were acting in her best interests according to their faith. They claimed they had witnessed things no human could fake, phenomena that defied rational explanation. The prosecution argued they had allowed a mentally ill young woman to starve to death, prioritizing a medieval ritual over proven medical care. Ultimately, all 4 were found guilty and given suspended sentences. A key piece of evidence in the trial and a source of enduring horror were the 42 audio cassettes recorded during the exorcisms. These recordings still exist. On them, the cheerful voice of a young woman is replaced by a cacophony of demonic growls, screams, and arguments. Even decades later, they are profoundly disturbing, almost impossible to listen to. Was Anneliese Michel a victim of demonic possession, or a tragic casualty of religious fervor and untreated mental illness? Her case remains a haunting and unresolved question, a dark testament to the devastating power of belief. Our next story takes us deep into the isolated hills of eastern Romania, to a place where ancient faith and modern medicine collided with catastrophic results. This is the case of the Tanacu exorcism, a tragedy that unfolded within the walls of a remote Orthodox monastery and sent shockwaves across the globe. It forces us to confront a terrifying question: where is the line between religious devotion and deadly delusion? The story begins not with a demon, but with a troubled young woman seeking sanctuary. In early 2005, 23-year-old Marichica Irina Cornici arrived at the Holy Trinity Convent in Tanacu. An orphan who had spent much of her life in state care, she was visiting a friend, hoping to find peace and a sense of belonging. But shortly after her arrival, her behavior became erratic and deeply disturbing. She would laugh and scream at inappropriate times during services, grow increasingly agitated, and insist that she was hearing voices. The other nuns were frightened. Initially, Irina was taken to a local psychiatric hospital. Doctors diagnosed her with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. However, after a brief stay, she was released back into the care of the convent. There, the head priest, Father Daniel Petru Corogianu, had a very different diagnosis. He was a charismatic and deeply devout man, but one who held a firm belief in the literal, physical presence of evil. He saw Irina's symptoms not as a medical illness, but as a spiritual affliction. He became convinced that the voices she heard were not hallucinations, but the whispers of the devil himself. Father Corogianu believed that modern medicine had failed and that only a sacred rite could save her soul. He declared that Marichica Irina Cornici was possessed. As Irina's condition worsened, reportedly becoming more violent, refusing food and calling the other nuns sinners, the priest decided to take matters into his own hands. He gathered 4 other nuns who shared his conviction, and together they prepared for a spiritual battle. They were not doctors trying to treat a patient. They were soldiers of God preparing to cast out a demon. What followed was a brutal 3-day ordeal. Believing her possessed strength was too great, Father Corogianu and the 4 nuns restrained Irina. They bound her hands and feet, gagged her with a towel to stifle her screams, and chained her to a makeshift wooden cross in a cold, damp cell. The exorcism began. For 3 agonizing days they chanted prayers and anointed her with holy water, convinced they were in a fight for her eternal soul. During this entire period, Irina remained bound, deprived of food, and crucially, water. The priest and nuns interpreted her struggles and cries not as the desperate actions of a terrified, ill young woman, but as the writhing of the demon within. They believed they were purifying her, freeing her soul from the evil that had taken root. They were tragically, fatally wrong. On the 3rd day, Irina fell silent. Believing the demon had finally been expelled, they untied her. But she was limp, unresponsive. She wasn't free. She was dead. An ambulance was called, but it was far too late. The official autopsy report cited the cause of death as dehydration, exhaustion, and asphyxiation. The news exploded. The Romanian Orthodox Church, facing an international scandal, acted swiftly, condemning the priest's actions and calling it a case of abominable murder. Yet Father Corigianu remained defiant. During the trial, he showed no remorse, famously stating, "I was trying to take the devil out of her. It was not a crime." He insisted he was only doing God's work, and that Irina's death was a tragic but necessary consequence of a spiritual war. The court disagreed. Father Corigianu was sentenced to 14 years in prison for murder, and the 4 nuns received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. The case divided Romania. While many were horrified, a significant portion of the local population sided with the priest, believing he had genuinely fought a demonic presence. To this day, many locals insist that strange phenomena, unexplained noises, shadowy figures, still occur around the now infamous monastery. The monastery itself was briefly closed, but has since reopened under new leadership. However, the small, cold room where Irina Cornici took her last breath has been permanently sealed. No one has entered it since, and no one dares sleep in the adjacent rooms. It remains a dark monument to a tragedy born from the collision of faith, fear, and untreated mental illness. Our final, and perhaps most perplexing case takes us back over a century to a remote corner of the British Empire. The year is 1906. The place, St. Michael's Mission in Natal, South Africa. Here, amidst the rolling hills, a community of Marian Hill missionaries worked to bring education and Christianity to the local Zulu population. It was a world defined by strict piety and order, a place where the lines between the sacred and the profane were drawn with absolute certainty. But that certainty was about to be shattered by one of its own students, a 16-year-old orphan named Clara Germana Cele. Clara was, by all accounts, an ordinary student at the mission. But in August of that year, she sought out her confessor, Father Erasmus Horner. In the hushed sanctity of the confessional, she made a startling admission. She had entered into a pact with Satan. The priest, though alarmed, initially tried to reason with her, perhaps suspecting a youthful fantasy or a cry for attention. He instructed her to pray and seek forgiveness. But Clara's confession was not the end of the matter. It was merely the beginning of a terrifying ordeal that would be meticulously documented by the mission's clergy. Within days, Clara's behavior grew erratic and deeply disturbing. The once quiet girl began speaking in languages she had absolutely no knowledge of. Witnesses, including numerous nuns and over 150 fellow students, reported hearing her converse fluently in German, Polish, French, and even Latin, languages completely foreign to an illiterate Zulu girl in rural South Africa. Her voice would shift, taking on a guttural masculine tone as she spoke, often revealing hidden sins and private thoughts of the people around her, causing shock and fear to ripple through the mission. She seemed to possess a clairvoyance that was both uncanny and malevolent. Her physical transformation was just as frightening. Witnesses said she developed a ferocious, almost bestial strength. It reportedly took multiple strong nuns to restrain her during her violent episodes. She would hiss like a serpent, tear at her own clothes, and claw at anyone who tried to approach her with a crucifix or holy water, which seemed to cause her excruciating pain. Her body would contort into unnatural positions, and she emitted sounds that were described as inhuman. But the most astonishing phenomenon was yet to come. According to multiple eyewitness accounts recorded by Father Horner, Clara began to levitate. During prayers, she would reportedly rise from her bed, sometimes as high as 5 feet in the air, floating horizontally as if lying on an invisible platform. While some modern interpretations might suggest mass hysteria or exaggeration, the sheer number of witnesses who swore to seeing these events makes them difficult to dismiss entirely. The nuns would sprinkle holy water on the floor beneath her floating body to prove there were no hidden wires or tricks involved. Convinced they were facing a genuine case of demonic possession, Father Horner and another priest, Reverend Mansuetti, resolved to perform a formal exorcism. The rite was a grueling 2-day ordeal conducted in the presence of the mission's nuns. According to the detailed records of the event, as the priests began their prayers, the atmosphere in the room grew unnaturally cold. A foul odor, described as smelling of decay, filled the air. As the rite reached its climax, the entity within Clara allegedly screamed through her, "She is mine! You will not drive me out!" Then, Clara let out a final, piercing scream so loud it was heard across the entire convent grounds.
When it ended, she collapsed, unconscious. Upon waking, she looked at the priests and whispered only 2 words. "Praise Jesus."
Clara Cele survived the exorcism, seemingly freed from the entity that had tormented her. She returned to her life at the mission, but the church records note that she never again spoke of what happened during those terrifying days. The events at St. Michael's Mission remain one of the most thoroughly documented and baffling cases of alleged possession in the 20th century, a chilling testament from a time and place where the veil between worlds seemed terrifyingly thin. These are just 3 of hundreds of recorded exorcisms throughout history, each one raising the same question. Were these victims suffering from mental illness, or did they truly face something supernatural? Even today, the Vatican still trains exorcists, and cases are reportedly rising every year. Maybe the scariest part isn't the demons themselves, but that people still believe they're real, because whether you believe or not, something dark is out there, and sometimes it finds its way in. If you made it this far, you're brave. Which story chilled you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you love real horror and true crime, subscribe, because the next story might just keep you up at night.